Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. We start with Nimrod's European tour of antinatalism outreaches. He, along with Lawrence, are in London doing outreach events. As you can see, they are having some nice time telling people not to have kids. Nimrod will be in London till tomorrow. Then on 6th and 7th July, he will go to Amsterdam where he will join Anonymous for Voiceless campaign. So vegan and antinatalism outreach combined. On 8th July, Nimrod goes to Cologne and then to Marburg on 9th, Stuttgart on 10th before ending the week in Meinheim on 11th of July 2026. Now, from 2026, let's jump back to 1892. A French feminist and animal rights activist stood up in front of Paris audience and said something almost nobody wanted to hear. That being born is a catastrophe, that life itself is a kind of evil, and that the kindest thing we could do is to stop making more of it. Her name was Mary Eve. Mati Hairi and Amanda Suknik have a new paper on her, Mary Eve and the Pain of Living, the Aristotelian Vice and Wisdom of Efilism. The original paper is in Finnish language, but I got it translated into English. It uses Aristotelian ethics and philosophy to examine Mary Eve. Most of Western philosophy assumes that life is good. This goes all the way back to Aristotle, who said humans naturally aim at survival, having children, and passing on the species, and that pursuing anything else is unnatural. This idea got baked into centuries of religious and legal thinking. Life is sacred, reproduction is a duty, and questioning that is basically deviant. But that was never the whole story. Some ancient Greeks were actually pessimists. One line attributed to Sophocles says that the best thing is never to be born and second best is to die as fast as possible. Later, 19th century philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer argued that if humans really thought it through rationally, we would probably stop having children out of compassion for them. That pessimist tradition never fully died. It resurfaced in 20th century existentialism in form of Sartre and Camus, in a Norwegian philosopher named Peter Wiesel Zapffe who argued humanity should just quietly stop reproducing, and most relevantly for us, in modern antinatalism popularized by philosopher David Benatar, who argues that it's always a harm to bring someone into existence. And this is where the paper gets on a historical thread. Long before antinatalism was even a word, there was Mary Eve, a poet, anarchist, and an animal rights activist who once physically interrupted one of Louis Pasteur's experiments on dogs. Louis Pasteur was famous for inventing rabies vaccine. In 1892, she gave a speech called The Pain of Living, where she didn't hold back. She described life and reproduction as a grotesque, endless cycle of birth and death, something to be resisted, not celebrated. How dare those who have just closed the graves begin again from the cradle? Who would not be horrified by this cosmic wheel in which love and death pass back and forth between embryos and corpses? By this macabre nature, this lustful phantom that greedily spews forth generations only to crush them beneath its own flood and swallow them again, this all-devouring seductress, this vomit of fetuses and ghosts, and who would not feel an immense and vengeful urge to seize this beast by the throat, to smother its mouth and its bowels, and to bury this great nightmare, this dark pan, in eternal nothingness? And it's not just human extinction that she celebrated, although that would be one good step in the direction. The world will, of course, sooner or later come to its end, and I have no quarrel with that. I do not even mind gazing into the mists of eternity and seeing the earth finally cleansed of its human microbes, left to wild plants and animals, awaiting the blessed day when it is stripped even of this last form of life. Now, whether you call this sentiocentric antinatalism or Efilism depends on your semantics and taxonomies. The paper likens this to Efilism as proposed by Inmendum on YouTube. But that's not the central part of the paper, which evaluates Mary Eve through Aristotle's framework, the one usually used to defend that life is actually good. Aristotle said people fall in four categories: virtuous, you know the right goal, and you follow through effortlessly; acritic, weak willed, You know the right goal, but a small desire distracts you and you fail to act on it. Continent, strong willed. You feel the same distracting desire, but you override it and do the right thing anyway. Vicious, you are aimed at the wrong goal entirely. Traditional Aristotelian logic would say the right goal is reproducing and sustaining life, so anyone who refuses is either weak willed or just vicious, plain and simple. But the authors flip the frame. What if the real goal, the rational one, is reducing suffering, not reproducing? Under that lens, Eve doesn't look weak willed or evil at all. She looks like someone who felt the pull toward comfortable social conventions, having kids, letting nature take its own course, and so on, but had the strength to resist it because she was following a more demanding, more rational principle, that is, don't cause unnecessary suffering. When talking about suffering of kittens, Eve says this: it would be simple to catch the mother cat when her time to give birth has come, and then, in the name of reason and compassion, to lift the newborns from the womb one by one, holding them firmly by the scruff of the neck, and plunge them into a tub of water covered with lid heavy enough that they cannot rise back to the surface, so that they die at once without having lived at all. This would have spared much trouble and would have done a service both to the mother and to her young. I have been killing animals in my home for 20 years now, and I regard these executions as my duty, a sacred duty that I wish everyone would fulfill. From this, you might think she is a vice, she is a criminal. But note that she is doing this as a duty, not to fulfill any personal desires. As she further explains, I have not arrived at this without hesitation or tears. Each time my spirit and my body wage war, I end my sursum corda with a silent sob, meaning I cry in my heart while doing this. That reframes her from vicious to something closer to what Aristotle would call wise, or at least strong willed in service of a genuine good. The paper comments whether one regards Eve's example as a conflict of values, protecting life versus alleviating suffering, or as a struggle between reason and instinct. It stands as evidence of a strong will that emerges victorious from an inner struggle. The authors are careful to say this isn't the same as extreme utilitarian arguments where you might justify horrifying actions for the greater good. They explicitly reject that. Their argument is narrower. If you accept that suffering is bad and worth avoiding, then choosing not to have children or not to exploit animals follows pretty logically. You don't need some radical, drastic intervention, just restraint. So, the paper's final question is really this: is refusing to participate in life's continuation a vice, or is it wisdom? And their answer, following Yu's logic to its conclusion, is that if you take suffering seriously, it might be the wiser path, even though it goes against thousands of years of life is sacred thinking. Now, whether or not you agree with Efilism or Antinatalism, this paper does something interesting. It takes a nearly forgotten 19th century radical and shows that her extreme ideas fit remarkably well into one of philosophy's oldest and most respected frameworks. Sometimes the vice of one era turns out to be a serious philosophical position the next century finally catches up to. In Potentia, Antinatalism in True Detective and a Round of Applause is an article by Sanju Ozge Osman. Sanju is also the translator of Better Never to Have Been in Turkish. In this article, she examines why the works of fiction almost never let a character seriously argue that it would be better never to have been born. In doing that, she looks at two television dramas, one American, one Turkish, and suggests that the answer lies less in taboo than in the mechanics of storytelling itself. Three forces work against representing this idea accurately. Most people carry a documented optimism bias that overestimates good outcomes and survives even repeated evidence to the contrary, making a philosophy built on the absence of that bias feel alien on the screen. Culturally, the figure of the child functions as a stand-in for hope and futurity. So, stories that question whether new life is good undercut the reassurance that the narrative is built to provide. And structurally, antinatalism has no natural protagonist. It defends the interests of people who don't yet exist, and fiction has no way to give voice to someone who isn't there. When the idea does appear, it is usually neutralized, reframed as trauma, depression, or a temporary crisis that gets resolved by the story's end. Shanzu looks at two exceptions and two strategies. True detectives Rust Cole voices the position almost verbatim. Consciousness as an evolutionary error, extinction as an honorable choice, and parenthood as an act of hubris. But the season's finale quietly reverses him. A near death experience, tears, and a declaration that Light's winning retroactively recast his pessimism as unresolved grief rather than settled conviction. The realist, character driven format cannot sustain the position to the end. A round of applause solves the problem differently by breaking realism altogether. An unborn fetus is depicted as a grown man inside the womb, articulating his reluctance to be born before he has any biography, trauma, or personality to blame on it. When the baby later crawls back into his mother's womb rather than remain born, the show dramatizes the position without explaining it away because the character has no life story available to reduce to it. So the contrast between the two tells that if you want to represent antinatalism in the work of fiction, and if you want it to be sustained and not reabsorbed back into hope or some optimistic outlook, then you have to abandon the rules of realistic storytelling. An accurate representation of antinatalism benefits from unnatural or impossible modes of narration. Pessimism and Antinatalism, a Zapffeian view on procreation, is a new article in a Scandinavian journal by Henrik Andersen. Henrik Andersen argues that pessimism does not logically imply antinatalism. He claims that Zapf's own philosophy actually provides reasons to have children because parenthood functions as one of the most effective coping mechanisms against the suffering and meaninglessness of existence. In short, rather than saying life is terrible, therefore don't reproduce, Anderson argues life is terrible, therefore raising children may help you endure it. This is the central claim of the paper. The paper begins by distinguishing two broad motivations for antinatalism. Environmental antinatalism, which argues that humans damage the environment so fewer births are desirable. Examples include Thomas Malthus' population control mechanisms and arguments from deep ecology. The author criticizes these views because they historically became connected with coercive population control, eugenics, and restrictions on reproductive freedom. Second type is pessimistic antinatalism. This is the form relevant to Benatar and Peter Wiesel-Zapfe. The reasoning is life contains more suffering than happiness, therefore coming into existence is bad, and therefore we ought not to reproduce. Anderson accepts that pessimism may describe life accurately, but it disputes only the final inference. The paper summarizes Zapfe's famous 4 defenses against existential awareness. One is isolation, that is to keep disturbing truths and thoughts outside conscious awareness. For example, avoiding discussions of death, shielding children, taboos, and so on. Socially, it is most often manifested by an agreed upon mutual silence. Second is anchoring. This is a way of creating stable source of meaning. It could be religion, career, family, traditions, etc. Distraction keeps us busy enough to avoid confronting existential dread. Work, hobbies, entertainment serve this purpose. And finally, sublimation transforms our suffering into something valuable. It helps channelize our energy in building terrestrial meaning and construct some sort of justification to our suffering. The paper accepts Zapfe's framework almost entirely. It also acknowledges that these coping mechanisms are not foolproof in hiding the existential anxiety from us. But it argues that child rearing combines all 4 coping mechanisms simultaneously and may be the strongest of the possible options to apply these mechanisms in real life. Anderson recognizes the difference between procreation and child rearing. You can do child rearing through adoption and still get all the benefits of raising children. But the process of adoption is practically cumbersome and rare compared to child rearing as a result of biological procreation. Therefore, Anderson implies procreation when he's talking about the benefits of child rearing. Isolation is easily achieved through children. By isolating the children from the grim realities of the world, parents themselves will be isolated from the same realities. Or sometimes a family decides to leave the chaotic and uncertain urban life and moves to a suburban town. In making this transition, the parents consciously opt for a lifestyle that limits their exposure to the complexities and uncertainties of urban life. Having children provides us with a good and strong distraction. Filling one's life with the practical responsibilities that comes with having children clearly serves as a distraction. The world of immediate and tangible responsibilities, from changing diapers to soothing a crying infant, shifts the focus away from internal agony to the external needs of the child. Anchoring. Having children helps you anchor your focus on raising them. Children give life direction, they create long term goals, family becomes the strongest possible anchor. The couple who feel lost and lack a sense of direction choose to start a family to construct a direction with all of its necessities. Through this action, individuals can escape their sense of directionlessness and find meaning in a life filled with practical responsibilities. Finally, sublimation is the transformation of pain into something positive. Anderson spends a lot of energy in describing how parenthood is so transformative that no other personal endeavor can be compared to it. While artistic endeavors are short term and only transform aspects of life, the change brought about through procreation is much larger. Parenthood dismantles the ego's stronghold, instilling in you a sense of selflessness, responsibility, and unconditional love unlike any other. Anderson concludes that child rearing may be the best coping strategy available to pessimists. Therefore, pessimism supports procreation rather than antinatalism. He also addresses some objections. One is the objection that Zapffeian himself was against reproduction. He famously wrote, "Know yourself, be infertile, and let the earth be silent." Yet, Anderson says Zapffeian never noticed that his own psychological theory points in the opposite direction. The author argues Zapffeian's prescriptions contradict his own coping theory. He gives Zapffeian's mountaineering as an analogy. Zapffeian endorsed climbing because it provided all four mechanisms against the existential awareness. Parenting is, in a sense, like climbing a mountain. The path is not easy. There are milestones and small peaks on the way. You need a partner you can trust your life with. Together, you keep going toward your goal, which can be to reach the highest peak or to build a new human being full with personality, and the rewards are analogous, although in the case of procreation are even stronger. One difference is that in case of climbing, you're not creating a new life which will be in need of those mechanisms in turn. Procreation is this Ponzi scheme as Benatar has described. Each generation creates another merely to solve its own existential problems. Anderson replies that Benatar never explains why such a chain is inherently unsustainable if births remain around replacement level. Ponzi schemes are not sustainable in the long run, but Benatar fails to provide us with reasons as to why procreation as a means to create meaning is not sustainable in the long run. It is uncertain as to why procreation at replacement level should not be sustainable. The paper argues that pessimism alone is descriptive. It says, life is bad, but it does not automatically say that therefore reproduction is immoral. To reach antinatalism, the author says you must add an independent ethical theory such as hedonism or welfarism. Even then, he argues, antinatalists still face problems like the non-identity problem, uncertainty about future generations, disagreement over whether non-existence can even be compared with existence. Therefore, pessimism alone cannot establish antinatalism. In short, pessimism does not entail antinatalism. Pessimism is compatible with reproductive freedom. Child rearing may be one of the best psychological responses to life's tragedy, and therefore, the common association between pessimism and antinatalism is mistaken. Now on to some notable videos. Ricardo Lopes of The Dissenter interviewed Dr. Orna, who is a sociologist, lecturer, writer, and feminist activist. She teaches at multiple universities in Israel. Her field of study focuses on the social expectations projected on women, both those who are mothers and those who are not, especially by choice. She's the author of Regretting Motherhood, a Study. This particular interview focused on the same subject, regretting motherhood, how society expects women to have children, how regretting motherhood is still seen as a taboo subject not to be talked about, how women who regret motherhood become mother in the first place, the contradiction between the notion that a woman's life is complete when she has children versus women who regret having children, and so on. One topic which I think was not discussed, and Ricardo, if you're watching, then please correct me if I missed that. But what was not discussed was the difference in regret by someone who becomes a mother for themselves versus for bringing a child into existence. It would be interesting to know how many women actually regret being a mother rather than regretting having been brought a child here. Lawrence interviewed Rachael Tosin, who was previously interviewed by The Times about antinatalism. Rachael makes TikTok videos on antinatalism, lives in the UK, and also has some Nigerian connections. In the interview, we come to know how she reached her antinatalist views, how she locates herself within the people around her, her anti capitalist connection with antinatalism, her experience with the Times, and some insulting questions that were thrown at her during that interview. Overall, a nice light-hearted chat for a quite little afternoon. Those were some of the stories for this week. Thanks for watching and see you next time.